Gets posted.
So she's baking now. Just tell her how to I was telling her how every time I go to the register, really like insurance and qualifiers, and the guys like, and
Yeah.
I'll tell you.
Yeah, no, I know that. Obviously this was no, it was just them. And then it got canceled because everyone found out and they were trying to.
Okay, now I can see that our hardcore students and other left here. So please.
So yeah, we should.
Professor Sushant and Professor Hamdi generously agreed to stay a little bit longer and answer questions. And whereas we are usually at 40 time to ask questions. They said every 10 minutes of your talk they wanted to ask, just raise your hand and ask questions, but they had to wait until the end of the talk. So now they are bursting in. And you're not always hard questions.
I'm always bursting.
Right. So let's get started.
I just had a comment first. Dr. Rajan, you made a point about how like you don't know whether we need like a blueprint or like a goal in mind, or whether we should continue to just like address the issues first before we actually establish that, so that we don't like confine ourselves to a specific plan. And I thought that was really interesting because a lot of times the social sciences are criticized for like critiquing the problems in society but not offering any solutions. And so, just in general. And so I thought it was interesting because a lot of the times the solutions come from identifying the problems. So the critique, the fact that they're criticized for that in general is just completely counterintuitive, because the only way to come to a solution is to continue to evaluate the problems. And so I thought it was interesting that you questioned whether or not there should be a specific plan in mind for what we idealize the world to be like if we were like, this is what we want women's rights to reach. This is the point we want to reach. I just thought that was interesting. It was before you mentioned the utopia, so I thought it was.
Yeah, I think that's a really intelligent question, and it applies not just to feminism, any social movement or any project. And between the idea of critique of something that analyzes an issue and finds what are its components and what made it go, and then you find the defect in a situation. So what is implicit, even if we don't have a blueprint or an agenda or a pillar, what is implicit in your criticism is remove the grounds of whatever it is objectionable. So obviously when you're saying this is a problem with this situation, then you also are saying let's remove that problem. So that becomes its own agenda in a sense. But beyond that, I think when we say vision, we mean something beyond that. Like apart from those implicit kinds of correctives and reforms and changes, I think we suggest something, and that's why somebody used the word blueprint, which is a little bit more specific, I think, than a vision. A blueprint is not only what is ahead, but also how you're going to get there. So it's kind of completely dotted and crossed, and which allows you very little room for maneuver or flexibility. Right? And so one has to be open to the contingent. One has to be open to things that happen. So there's a difference between having a vision for the future and having a blueprint for the future. And I think without a vision, you cannot have a social. I see what do you want to see, how you want to do. But generally, visions tend to be utopic, tend to be ideal, and they're not really that anyone actually entertains the hope that that will be reached, but nevertheless goes on. So, yes, I think that I'd like to say that implied and implicit in every kind of project of bringing about social transformation is some idea of what is ideal. And I know that, even in an American classroom, I just feel that there is so much, it is such a authoritarian classroom because teachers say, I don't want to impose my views on the students, just open-ended, and so on. And I always have this more authoritarian view of the teacher, which begins with, I know better than you, and I know what I want to make you do. And, this idea that there is something that in a teacher's role which is transformative. So I think, again, that need not be authoritarian, but I think that is possessed of a certain ideal or notion of what a teacher would be. So I think these are kind of related questions. It depends, maybe a question of degree rather than an absolute sense of, okay, let's just see where this takes us, let's just improvise and let's just go from step to step. There's one kind of laissez-faire. I think at another level you do have some particular kinds of vision. And those can be contested. Those visions can be questioned. The idea of a classless society is not everybody's idea. It's not everybody's ideal. I think once you lay out an ideal, then it can be something that's open to debate. But Rashmi might have something to add.
It sounds like there's a question here that's burning, so that was wonderful. So I don't have anything to add.
Okay, so one of the things that stood out to me in your speech or vision was the idea that science and technology provide an emancipatory potential and also may mark kind of a roadmap for feminism and for emancipating I guess the things that currently subjugate or the sources of women's oppression at the moment. And then you also mentioned that if gender is removed as the grounds of oppression, then what about the other grounds that may also be destabilized alongside that? So something that came up for me was that I guess harnessing science and technology in reproductive technologies has this promise, but at the same time, we've already witnessed how with the other thing that I can think of at the moment is with something like surrogacy, you actually have, a benefit or an emancipatory potential for some women, which actually becomes the source of subjugation or kind of reinvigorating classism for other women. And so they may not, so sometimes that emancipation might be sort of mutually exclusive. It might work for some, but not for others. How do you respond to that, and how do you feel like we can avoid those
things? Very well. I can't better you on that. I think you just looked at the complexity of that situation. It cannot, no intellectual can actually say that the answer lies in science and technology. It's just not possible. But neither can we relinquish it. I think that's mainly I think what Firestone and Sultanas ask us to think about is, should we relinquish or should we set ourselves against science and technology? How much of a control do we want over the kinds of research that's being carried out, the uses to which these things are put and so forth. That is an area that we sort of set our face against primarily because we think it's not for us. In some ways it's already an alienating kind of situation. So we tend to leave it out, but I think we need to bring it back into thinking. There are no illusions on that count. I don't know the history of the contraceptive pill. I'm not sure about labor-saving devices. I'm not sure whether the impetus for that came or the demand for that came from housewives or the inventions came from women or whether somebody had women's interests at heart in doing them. But it is possible that if women gain more consumer power, as they enter the workforce, they are spending money. And you do find a lot of things are targeted at women purchases. So there is a way in which women are empowered. More things are made for women, not just fashion objects, not just appliances, but also medical research and so on. You had this really nice paper on breast cancer, and you see some of the things that targeted at women. And again, as you say, that might just pull up and, it might be things that actually have a bad fallout, like contraception or surgery. So I think it means basically being more engaged with the whole field of, and between the unanticipated consequences of something and the intended consequences of something, I think we need to be clear in our mind how these things benefit any particular constituency. And I have no illusions about these things were made for us, but these things are things that can benefit us. I think is a permissible way of thinking about. One of the things I left out of my paper was an example from a novel, which is written about caste oppression in India. And outcasts were given the task of carrying human waste on their heads because there was no other way of getting rid of waste. So this was defined as a scavenging caste. And now it's been outlawed in the law as a violation of human rights and so on. And Gandhi took on a whole campaign against scavenging, and outcasts themselves fought against it. Ultimately, there's a novel in which we talk about various reformers and various strategies and so on. And one of them says the invention of the toilet flush will bring about an end to human scavenging. And that's a technological fix for a social problem. Now, you might ask, can technology fix social problems? A social problem must be addressed in social terms. But in a way, the toilet flush has done more to bring about an end to human scavenging in India than anything else. And it wasn't invented in order to emancipate outcasts. It was an invention that had to do with many other aspects of development and so on. It incidentally brought an end to this. But there are other ironies to that, because now those who work on cleaning toilets are still the scavenging caste. So that's a whole different story as well. But nevertheless, I think there are ways in which there have been technological, non-feminist, non-political solutions to political and social issues. And I think some awareness of that, and again, not able to that difficult, but explore that. And then I think you might have something to add to that.
Again, I'm sorry, I was a little bit distracted.
So Dr. Tambe, in the beginning of your speech, you talked about having it all and, or what feminism, or a false construction of what feminism as an institution perceives to mean by wanting it all. But often the success of white feminists or Western feminists comes on the backs of immigrant women who then take over the traditionally domestic roles of childcare and cleaning. And also in preparing your introduction, I went through your Twitter feed. And you tweeted hashtag solidarity is for white women. And I thought that also sort of tied into the idea of the construction of a false perception of what the telos of feminism would be. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on how can we reconcile the idea that women want to achieve in traditionally masculine ways with their career, with raising a family, etc. But at the same time, how can we not sacrifice the lives of immigrant women? So I think I wrote this in a blog response for Professor Park's class, but white women or Western women are breaking the glass ceiling, but the shards are falling on immigrant women. So how can we reconcile these two opposed ideas?
That's beautifully put, yeah. I mean, it's very sad, but yes, I mean, that's a really, really wonderful formulation, and I think it's very apt. And I don't think there is an easy answer to it, but maybe the problem is actually the scope of the we. When we're speaking about feminism, who is the we that we have in mind? And indeed that the problem has been the contracting of the we. In this current iteration of the conversation around having it all. women play, but the fact that it's articulated in terms of individual women who are solving the problem in their own lives without sort of thinking about the claims that can be made either on states or on employers, the conditions under which people are being pitted against one another, right? All that doesn't form a part of the problem, or it does, but in a very sort of defeatist way. Like it's only, oh, workplace cultures need to be changed. But workplace culture is such a narrow way of sort of thinking about the problem, right?
Yeah, if you don't mind if I
Yeah.
sort of follow up. Yeah, you talked about the narrow definition of what professional means, and I think that also ties into a more globalized idea of what labor means. And in an introduction to sort of development class, we learned about invisible economies and how a lot of farm work and just sort of very like villages that can sustain themselves are completely neglected from the traditional measure of success in GDP because they're not, you know, big city industrial contributing to GDP in a measurable way. So how do you think that the changing the definition of what labor is, maybe a woman, a stay-at-home mom is also paid, is labor. How do you think that the reconstruction of the word labor can really help with the emancipation of both immigrant and Western women?
Yeah, I think clearly, you have an idea of where that can take us, and I think you're absolutely right. The interesting thing is that the people who pick up that argument, unfortunately, are on the political right. No, I mean, in the United States right now, the people who say, well, it's also work, are often, they're the anti-feminists who say feminists don't take them seriously, when in fact the whole sort of history of feminist scholarship should clearly show that to be a lie, because it's feminists who first sort of articulated the idea of housework as work, and who talked about a strike by women. I mean, there's so many imaginative things, sort of ways of articulating that problem, or even different ways of calculating the GDP, or even people who have, in Venezuela, they have made it, they've successfully made it a policy change to include housework in the way they count GDP. So there are. It's just sometimes shocking, the narrowness of this specific slice of the U.S. feminist conversation, and it has a disproportionate power, and that's what I find troubling, or really wrong, actually.
I did want to ask you about that myself, to continue that. I think on the one hand, you're right, I mean, this focus on individual women who made it, that kind of tokenism, but also addressing the problem of work and the workplace and so forth. On the one hand, they're not even generically, I think they're not feminist texts. And sometimes they even disavow being feminist texts. They come under the category of self-help, right? How can you have it all? How can you combine? Or how can you not? Right? The debates between Slaughter and so that it just comes under a different kind of writing that we think is, people who have formulas for how to do things and successfully. And the other thing is that they're not, although they're focused on individual achieving women, they actually, have a kind of simulation of collectivity, because these women are supposed to be role models.
Right.
So one woman will be someone who can teach a whole bunch of women. So this whole book that Lean In is an advice thing to other women, because together they can, increase their workplace power. But it's all about competition. It's all about, how to better somebody. And yet it gives that simulation of, okay, women can support each other in the workplace, and we can, and if I can do it, you can do it. Kind of
and actually, very directly also, I think, benefiting from a certain feminist jargon as well. I mean, Sheryl Sandberg actually cites women's studies texts, and she does so very, she does it with a sense of complete sort of a seamlessness, that yes, I'm of course one of you, but she actually is exploiting, it's an exploitative position, actually, that they're benefiting from this sort of cachet that feminism has in some quarters, but
and not much burden on other women. If one woman can do it all, you think there's something wrong with me that I can't.
Exactly.
So the model can be a kind of oppressive.
There's another question.
Yes, I guess my question is going to move us away from contemporary issues, though, because I really appreciated your exploration of the idea of a feminist utopia and what that would consist of. But as you mentioned briefly, a dystopia, because one person's utopia is another person's dystopia. I was wondering if you know of any examples of a feminist dystopia, what would that consist of?
There have been several, like feminist dystopias, Handmaid's Tale, and
Would you call is that still feminist, the Handmaid's Tale? I mean, what makes those, I guess, how might we define a feminist dystopia?
both of these kinds of texts, writings, genre of dystopia and utopia, are diagnostic texts. They diagnose the contemporary situation and then build an imaginary world out of the reading of the present, which is why I feel that reading them is symptomatic. You have a particular kind of utopia, not it's just the fact of it's being a utopia, but a particular kind of utopia, which means that it is reacting against, in this case, seclusion of women. So it gives you a tip-off about that. And something like Handmaid's Tale also talks of sexual stereotyping, reproductive nightmares, and precisely emancipation turning on itself and becoming further oppression. So those kinds of things, I think, are obviously aggravated or enhanced modes of the present. So I think that's where their value lies. So this is not the richness of the imagination and so on, but how they offer a kind of reading of the present.
Are there any more questions? Great, thank you so very much. That was planned. Actually, this is also, although I don't think I did a good job at publicizing it as such, it was supposed to be some kind of an open house as well. So actually, our two faculty members agreed to talk to you guys a little bit about a new course that they have been teaching. Not new, fairly new, because it's a course that started, I guess, you started offering it this year, right? They're both courses. So we have two teachers.
Okay, so very briefly, I'm Professor Kerry Hammerschlag, and I'm an art historian by training. And the course that I'm offering currently that's taking place this term is about representations of gender in the body in Victorian visual art and in art and visual culture. Sort of expanding on the geography of that course, next term I'll be offering a course that focuses on gender and sort of doesn't deal so much with the body as we're doing at the moment, but which will focus on 19th century art across different geographical, be it Western historical movements. So we will start with neoclassicism and work our way through romanticism, realism, impressionism, post-impressionism, and symbolism, and thinking about different ways that those art movements manifest in England, France, the United States, and Australia. You'll probably tell I'm Australian, so we're going to have a degree of post-colonial perspective. But we look at a variety of different visual sources, primary sources from the period, and feminist art historical interventions, and more recently queer art theoretical approaches to this material. So it's if you have an interest in art history or modern art history, 19th century art, this provides a sort of introduction to those major art movements. At the same time, we'll be analysing them in terms of the representation of femininity and masculinity, men, women, and everything between.
Any questions? Especially for majors, there is a distribution requirement, as you guys very well know. The most difficult requirement to fulfill among those 4 areas is the representation of gender, cultural representations of gender. For whatever reason, like we used to have it, that when the program was first created 25 years ago, actually we all had basically English courses. We kind of drifted away a little bit from that origin, and now we have a lot of sociological approaches and anthropological courses. So we do not have too many courses that fulfill that particular requirement, and this is a perfect course. That's why I was so happy when Karen joined the program this year. So if you do not have any more questions, everybody knows Professor Ononare. She's again going to be teaching sexual politics in the Middle East next semester, right? She'll tell you a little bit about that.
As well as introduction to sexuality.
Yes, sir.
So both, so I can tell you a bit about both. So for those of you who were present for this morning's panel, you had the opportunity to hear two papers that were written in the context of that course. So it's a course that in my head I still think of as being called Arab Feminisms in the plural. So it's a course that takes as its starting point some of the foundational texts of post-colonial theory. So for those of you who may have encountered sort of secondary texts, the exciting sort of starting point is that we look at some of the primary texts themselves. So we have an opportunity to read people like Edward Said firsthand. So it starts from that point, and we look at a variety of different issues from a post-colonial and transnational feminist perspective. So we, considering the size of the region that's kind of under focus in the course, we draw from different regional examples of women's involvement in revolutionary movements in North Africa and the Middle East. We look at relationships to questions of religion, questions of ethnicity and language. We look at cultural production and cultural representations of women and femininity throughout the region. And then taking a more contemporary kind of approach, we also look at what, if any, kinds of changes the Arab Spring has brought about. It's often referred to as having constituted a kind of gender revolution. So we look at women as actors within that revolution in particular, and consider the ways in which images of women have been utilized as signs and symbols for different stakeholders, and what ways forward there might be. So in a nutshell, that's that. I don't know if anyone has any particular questions about that course. And then Introduction to Sexuality Studies is a course that broadly, explores a variety of different issues from the perspective of queer theory. So for anyone who's interested in, again, reading some of the primary texts that we might consider as being foundational in the field of queer theory, it's an opportunity to do that in good company, so it's not so scary, and we all wrestle with it together. So we explore in depth questions of gender, questions of sexuality, questions of identity as they relate to or not to the LGBT acronym. We look at questions of sexuality and identity in relation to the state and legal frameworks. And as well as questions of popular culture and representations of deviant sexualities. So that's that question.
Any questions?
I have to leave.
Oh yes.
Thank you so much
Thank you so very much.
for the opportunity. It was wonderful to be with you, and wish you and the program the very best.
And we, as a program, are very happy to meet Anya.
Yeah, I was just telling her she has been here many times.
When she was a baby in a
Yeah,
stroller.
and in utero as well.
I remember her in a stroller. I was going to say, 2013, 2014 was the first year we started offering Introduction to Sexuality Studies. The first semester, the fall semester, we offered one session, one section. And we are still offering one section this semester, but I had a little bit of trepidation, wondering how many students are going to enroll in it, how it's going to be responded to, how the campus community will accept it, and what about the alums. But anyway, the story had a happy ending, and the class was a huge success. So now starting next semester, 2014-2015, we'll be offering 2 sections of Introduction to Sexuality Studies. So I'm very, very excited about that. What is also good about the whole development, alongside Introduction to Sexuality Studies, we also have Feminist Thought 2, now that focuses on queer theory as well as sexuality and gender theories. So that means those students who are interested in actually following a track on queer theory and queer studies, they can take the Introduction to Sexuality Studies and the Feminist Thought 2, and along to go with many other electives. So that actually we successfully, I think, established a track in queer sexuality studies. So I think it is a wonderful development for our program. And there's even there's another really wonderful news, which is now that we have 2 kinds of intro classes and 2 kinds of feminist theories, feminist thoughts, majors and minors are welcome to take, if they take both of the 2 different kinds of intro classes, right? They can count to one of them as their elective, especially for our majors who sometimes have a problem finding good electives to fulfill all the requirements. Nowadays, now they can take, for example, Intro to Women's and Gender Studies and Intro to Sexuality Studies and count to one of them as an elective. They can take Feminist Thought 1 and 2 and count one of them as not a foundational course, but actually an elective. So that's like having 2 more electives that you can choose from, and both of those courses are just amazing courses, and we've been receiving incredible responses. So that this semester, for example, when I got the pre-registration number, I was really thrilled because the Introduction to Sexuality Studies had actually, not only that was full, it has 38 students on the wait list. So I thought it's an incredibly exciting development that's happening in the program. Okay. Any questions? Well, our day started, as you very well know, at 9:30. I think we are all kind of wilting. So you are more than welcome to stay and please finish the food. And we know there is no more food. It's gone. Okay. There's no food.
Just snacks.
Well, thank you so
there's
very much.
mayonnaise and mustard if you want those packets.
Thank you so very much. And Sarah, Professor Stiles from Sociology Department, and Professor Randall Amster from Justice and Peace Studies program just joined us, and now